Hello, welcome. I have a brief introduction to read. Welcome, Tracy, Mairs, and Ashley Pineda, and welcome to our viewing community. On behalf of Hartsdale Neighbors Association, thank you for joining us for the school board candidate panel. Both Ms. Mairs and Mr. Pineda are incumbents running unopposed. Given the extreme circumstances arising from the COVID pandemic and the work ahead as we rebuild, it is of utmost importance that every community member has an opportunity to make an informed decision when voting by absentee ballot for both school board and the school budget by June 9th. Those ballots will be sent soon with postage paid by the district. Ms. Mairs and Mr. Pineda would like the community to direct budget questions to budget2021@greenburghcsd.org. The questions presented to our candidates in this panel are aggregated from community submissions. You've sent us versions of these. Each set of questions will be presented to the candidates on this recorded shared screen. I may interject occasionally with follow-up questions, but otherwise the candidates will be able to speak freely on the topics presented until the slide changes. Viewers will have a PDF available for reference so they can reference the questions being discussed. Candidates, you ready to get started?
Ready.
First set of questions, why are you running again? Why should you be reelected? Have your perspectives on the district and its needs changed since joining the board? If so, how? And in what way do you personally contribute to the effectiveness of the board?
Shall we do ladies first or?
You may, Tracy.
Sure.
Tracy, up to you.
No problem. So why am I running again and why should I be reelected? Well, I do feel like the board right now is in a very good place of trying to be more transparent, trying to be more professional and kind of working toward making some changes that I think will help the students, the staff, and the community to all really buy into the school district. And I think that I'm a part of that kind of movement of transparency. And so for that, I thought I should run again, stay 3 more years. I don't believe in really long stays on the board, really long tenures on the board. So for me, I think 2-3 years tops is good. I don't think I'd make it that long. But I think what we're doing right now needs to continue. I think we have some really good board members that are really focused on improvement on the district for excellence for our children. And so being a part of that, I want to continue on the board. Have my perspectives on the district and its needs changed since joining the board, and if how? Definitely my perspectives have changed a bit. When you're in that boardroom, you know that you have laws that you have to abide by. There's board policies you have to abide by. And it's just very different than being such an active and involved and invested parent, which I was before I got on the board, right? Before I got on the board, I could pretty much say almost anything about my opinion. Well, I was on the PTA, so you can't really say anything either there too, because then people think it's the PTA, but you can really advocate for your children. You can really get in there and speak about things that you want improved or things that you think are going great. But when you get on the board, even going and advocating for your own children becomes a little like hairy, because then people are like, well, are you speaking for the board? Are you speaking for yourself? And I always try to say, as a parent, I feel this way. And it's very difficult. I thought the district was good when I was outside the boardroom. I still think the district's good. So in that way, I haven't changed. My perspective has stayed the same in that way. But there are things that I thought being outside the boardroom, oh yeah, when I get in there, I'm gonna advocate for this, and I'm going to try to make that happen. And it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. There's 7 people there, and all 7 are very strong personalities. And sometimes we have 7 different views on a topic, which can be very difficult. Sometimes we're all in agreement, which is great. So yeah, my perspectives have changed a little bit since getting onto the board. In what way do you contribute to the effectiveness of the board? Well, this year I'm vice president, and as I said, this year is the first time, and I think it was like 12 or 13 years that the same 3 board members were not in board leadership roles.
Mm.
And so the vice president and the president are brand new leaders. We are committed to transparency. We're trying to rebuild some trust in the district, and it is proven to be difficult. But my effectiveness is in trying to build teamwork, trying to include everyone as a team, trying to communicate with everyone as a team. I do get frustrated and passionate at times, but I think I'm extremely supportive to our president as her vice president, and I believe in the board leadership and the district leadership, and so I try to be most effective by being a good team player. And I talk a lot. That's it.
Thank you. Tracy, you want to come in? And please, thank you for answering the question. You're also welcome to jump in if there are things you'd like to share along the way. It is just the 3 of us, so you're free to remark. But Tracy, I think this one's on, I'm sorry, Ashley, this one's on you.
No worries. So first of all, I want to say thank you, Ms. Ives, for putting this together into the HNA. It's a pleasure that even during these difficult and challenging times, we're still finding ways to communicate and try to reach out to our community and keep everyone informed. So the first question, why am I running again? Well, it's actually pretty simple. I've only been on the board for 1 year. I did have some goals in mind. We started down the road on achieving some of those goals, even though some of them were a little more difficult than others. And then here we are, surprise, surprise, COVID-19 strikes and the world basically gets flipped upside down. Why do I think I should be reelected? Well, I've been on the board now for a year and a few months. I think since the time that I've been on the board, my perspective at least is that we've been able to push things forward. I'm hoping that we can continue doing that as a group, as Tracy said. And my biggest thing is to do the best thing that I can for this district, while still trying to balance the needs of our community. It's kind of hard being a board member because you have 2 schools of thought. I've had people that tell me, well, how can you balance the needs of the school district, but still at the same time balance the needs of the community? Because those are sometimes, they're deeply intertwined, but depending on which side of the community is talking to you at the moment, their priorities may be different, not necessarily 100% aligned. So with that said, it's definitely a challenging thing to do. But my goal is still to try to continue to improve on the progress we've made so far. Have my perspectives on the district and its needs changed? Absolutely. When I first started this, I think it was last May, as soon as the election was over, I think that very same night I was presumably sworn in on some level, and the next day, boom, I was in the seat. And it's been an interesting journey. A lot has happened in that time. I still do think that some of the needs that I ran on the first time are absolutely still there. One of them was the funding for our building facilities. That's still definitely an issue. The other thing is, how do we address our actual facilities, right? So there's the funding for it. There's the how do we actually go ahead and address the facilities? What's our plan moving forward to actually repair them? So those are the two of the big ones I had. The other thing I had was increasing parental involvement. Interestingly enough, COVID-19 has done that on its own on some level, and that basically parents are as involved now as our teachers are in many levels on a day-to-day basis. We have become teachers for our children. And I hope I'm not speaking for only myself when I say that I don't think any of us had any idea how difficult it actually is to teach children throughout a whole day and keep their attention and keep them engaged and keep them moving forward. I cannot say enough things about how amazing our teachers are with that they're able to pull this off every day, and it's like no sweat off their back. But that said, absolutely our needs have changed. Those 2 areas I think are the same, but I think that we have a bigger urgency now when we get back into school. Our biggest need there is going to be, well, how do we address the return of our children to this district and getting back into the buildings and I personally, I'll start saying the disclaimers now because I'm not speaking for the board in its entirety. It's one of the things I learned at my training. You don't speak for the board in its entirety. You speak as an individual board member with your own opinions. It's my opinion only that a lot of our children are going to come back to school, and there's going to be some deficits, some time that we've lost, some skills that as much as great a job as we are doing, the school district is doing, because my kids are still progressing and they're doing their, sometimes they have online meetings and they have sometimes, the math teacher will get on with them, or their main teacher will get on with them and do like a little video chat here or there. It's still not the same. It's not the same as us as adults working remotely. I think us working remotely as adults, we're in our groove. We know what to do. We know our responsibilities. We're talking about children here. They're still learning, and we can't fault them for that. So because of that, they are definitely going to have some social emotional needs, as well as some skill loss. It's not the same. So with that said, I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that one of the biggest needs we will have to address come September. And then frankly speaking, the next thing after that is, we're all hearing this talk in the media, about potentially wave 2. Well, what's going to happen then? And how are we going to progress with that? Thankfully, I'm happy to say that I think that our school district has done an amazing job handling this. And the administration has done a great job of, basically flipping the switch overnight and turning us into remote learning mode. Thankfully, we had some pieces of the puzzle already in place. Specifically, we had the Chromebook distribution, and we had a lot of, educational technology type of learning, online learning already built in. But it's still been an uphill battle for all of us to get used to it. And I think that definitely we're going to have to continue on that path and preparing for that wave 2, because I wouldn't be surprised if we go back into school in September and then some kind of wave 2 hits, and then maybe we're all back at home again for some period of time. So I'm hopeful that's just, hopefully that's just the media and injecting these ideas, and maybe we get lucky and this doesn't happen, but, we have to prepare for that eventuality. And then the last question, in what way do I contribute to the effectiveness of the board? That's an interesting question. One of the things that I hope I do, and I feel like I do, but it's always an opinion type of thing. I think I tend to be one of the more neutral type of opinions on the board. I don't actually go in. First off, I don't have any alliances with any of the board members. You can talk to anybody, can talk to any of them, and they'll tell you, yeah, he's the one guy that sits on his own.
This is true.
And I do that on purpose, and I do that on purpose because I feel that as neutral as I can stay, it helps me to really analyze the decisions, the conversations, the topics that come up, really as objectively as I can. And I try to always make the best decision I can. I'm sure that there's decisions I've made that not everyone agrees with. I know that for a fact, because when like Tracy said, when you're in that boardroom, it's interesting. Each decision that comes up, you can never guess what someone's going to say. You may have an inkling what certain members will say, but there are times when we are all on completely opposite ends of the room. Those are usually those longer meetings that we're in exec session for a while. And then there's times that we're done pretty quickly and we all pretty much align fairly quickly. So I think that one of the things I strive to do is when we're in one of those spots where we're kind of at different opinions at different points, I usually try to come up with, in my mind, okay, what do I think is the best solution? And is there a common ground that we can all reach? And I usually try to raise my hand and bring up that topic, the suggestion, the idea. And I'm like, okay, it sounds like half of us are over here, half of us are over there. How can we meet in the middle to try to keep the agenda moving forward? And I think I do a good job of that. I'm not going to say I can guarantee I do it because, again, I've only been doing this for a year now. But that's my opinion. The other thing I contribute is I really try to, where possible, if I know the rules of the road, as I'll say it, because I'm still learning them, I try to keep us following those rules where possible. But, I still admittedly have a lot to learn.
Okay, thank you. With all of our lives in the background, what is the most important issue you believe the school board is facing due to the COVID-19 emergency? Thank you. You did speak to this briefly. You're free to expand upon it or just touch base on what you both brought up earlier. What were your top 3 priorities before the pandemic? And to expand upon that, if you have a moment, where do you see them coming back into play, or do you?
Okay, who wants to go first?
It's up to you, Tracy. Either way, it's fine with me.
Would you like to
So
go since we'll just take turns a bit?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So what is the most important issue, I believe? Okay, well, I started touching on this, so I'll go a little deeper. I think the biggest thing we're going to have now is, I think our children are going to have a lack of skills coming back. There's a gap. And it's going to be interesting because part of the conflation of the issues is, I know that as a board, we're going to make the right decision to do what we need to do to try to support our children as much as possible and help them bridge that skills gap that's occurring. At the same time, though, we still have our buildings that need repair. So one of the things that I think you'll have seen throughout the budget process is we were trying to balance the needs of the children with the needs of our buildings. And because, funding isn't at a all-time high, to say the least, specifically from the governor and from the state, we have that little looming question of what's actually going to happen from the state aid perspective. So I think right now the biggest issue we're going to have is really funding, and where do we allocate it and how, specifically during COVID-19. And then I'll stop talking on that. So I'll leave some stuff for Ms. Mairs, and then let me get on to the top 3 priorities before the pandemic. Okay, so I touched on that as well. They were originally the fair state funding for our buildings. They were addressing the aging infrastructure of our buildings, and they were increasing parental involvement. Those were my top 3 priorities before the pandemic. Frankly, now I feel like the funding that we had started working on, and we had gone to Albany, and Ms. Mairs was part of that, and we had a conversation, and then we spoke with our local representative here as well, and we were making these inroads, and we were really starting to get in a place where I think we were starting to make progress on at least getting some kind of commitment. Probably not what we were anticipating. We were shooting for the stars, of course, knowing that we wouldn't get them, but that was at least our goal, start high and get what we can. I'm sure that is all completely shot out of the water. So with that said, when is that going to come back? I'm not sure, because I don't think that there's any way that we can somehow make Greenburgh Central School District stand out in the grand scheme of things when we have other school districts that are also going to have just basic funding deficits like we will, right? So that's kind of going to have to go on the back burner for a little bit. What I think we will not do, though, in my opinion, is I think we will not give up that thought, that fight. I think it's just not going to be, as much a priority at this moment, because we know that there's going to be, really nothing that the governor or the state's going to be willing to do on that, because there's a deficit all across the board for everything else, which is actually, in their opinion, more of an issue. So that was one of them. The aging facilities, we're still looking at a way. I'm still going to try to see what we can do to fix that. And obviously, it's going to be in small piecemeal projects at this point, because we're not going to be able to pass a major bond, to do anything like that, especially now with the economic situation the way it is. But my perspective is, if we can at least start tackling small projects and handle them one by one, overall, over time, each small project adds up, and you can cross that stuff off the list. So that's my perspective there. And then the increasing parental involvement, I said it before, I think that's one of the keys to our school district becoming even more successful. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has kind of forced that upon us. So I think I can say that on that level, we have already started increasing parental involvement, but also right before COVID-19 struck, I definitely saw a lot more community involvement. I won't necessarily say parental involvement, but guaranteed community involvement, specifically on a few of our committees. The facilities committee being the number one. I remember we had a few facilities committee meetings where there were, maybe 4 or 5 members, the typical individuals that make the time to come out and join us and help us discuss the needs of our facilities. And then right before the pandemic hit, very surprisingly, we got a lot of the community. I mean, at one point, I may be misquoting this, but I think Ms. Mairs will correct me if I'm wrong. I think we had at least 20 people in one of those meetings show up in person and talk to us about facilities and their perspectives. And this wasn't all just people that were with children in the school district as we usually have. This was folks from all over our community, and they were giving us different perspectives from different sides of the communities. It was actually very beneficial. And I think the other thing that we're seeing, as we saw it in this past weekend's fiscal committee meeting, we had a lot of participation there. So I think we're starting to get community involvement. And in my mind, if community involvement happens, eventually parental involvement hopefully will come. But, it's tough to say at this point, but those are definitely still 3 of my major priorities. But some of that may shift. I'll have to shift on the fly as needed to deal with what we're dealing with now.
Thank you. Tracy, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Ashley touched on the economics as an important issue, but for me, and it could be, my profession, I'm a social worker, I'm an advocate. Some of the reasons, if you will see me become passionate or really angry, it'll be around advocating for people's rights, advocating for respect for everyone, making sure that everyone is treated fairly. So one of the things that I think that is going to be a very important issue when we get back into school, and even now that we're out of school, is our children and our families' health and the health of our community. Social emotional health, of course, is the first thing that we think of, but also the physical health. You hear my kids screaming in the background now. Our children are home. They're home. Some of them are in very cramped environments. Ashley talked about his kids going and playing outside. I have a yard outside. I don't presume how you live, Samantha, but everyone doesn't have that in our community. And some people have very different lifestyles that they're leading and living, and just the safety, the physical health of our students, of our community, the social emotional health, the factors of economics and how that plays on, he's screaming now, how the economics plays on the mental health and the mental factors that our families have to deal with. And when the kids return, that's going to be a huge issue. That's going to be, I think, a barrier to learning in many ways. I think sometimes it's a barrier to learning right in your own home in many ways. So while economics is right up there, also the health and the ability to learn for our students when they return. And I mean the whole community. So even students that don't go to the schools or that go to private or parochial schools, they're still a part of our community. We're still neighbors. And that definitely is going to we're all going to affect one another. I'm sorry, I have difficulty concentrating with them screaming. And they were quiet when Ashley was talking, but anyway, hopefully I answered that question. The top 3 priorities before the pandemic were definitely the education, curriculum, improvement of our educational outcomes. The test scores for me are still way too low for my liking. Thankfully, my personal children do very well in school, partially because of, some of the things that I can afford to pay for them, to give them support, but also just the life that I've exposed them to, camps and trips and just worldwide education. All of our children don't have that, so definitely fighting for strong curriculum, but also support for our teachers so that they can impart the information to our students and actually teach our students. And really demanding, I'm so sorry, really demanding that that our children are able to have good educational outcome. I'm so sorry. They normally don't do this.
Don't be sorry. We all have them. That's why we're here. Don't be sorry.
The other thing, so education and the educational outcomes are super important for me. I have children in 3 different levels in Greenburgh. So I have a daughter that's finishing her 2nd year at Woodlands. I have a daughter that's finishing her 3rd year at RJ Bailey, and I have this little guy that's very
It looks on my screen like we just lost Tracy. Ashley, can you see her? There you are.
The things I was saying were curriculum and educational excellence are very important for me. The second thing I would say is the facilities. So, we tried to pass a bond. It did not pass. It failed for various reasons. But the issues that we have with the buildings did not go away, right? So they still exist. I'm on the facilities committee. I actually got on that committee when I first joined the board because I didn't know very much about facilities. So I've learned quite a bit. And I really think that we need to continue to push for improving our buildings, but also improving them in a way that they're maintained well, so that we're not kind of wasting money, and that the community can see and being transparent with seeing how we're utilizing the monies in order to improve our facilities. And then the third thing for me is actually safety. And I did not go on the safety and security committee this year, but I did approve and support us. Over the last 2 years, I think we really totally revamped the safety and security department. We have many safety and security officers and monitors, and we've provided them with a ton of training. We've made the doorways at all of the schools safe so that you have to buzz in, you have to show your ID. A lot of security enhancements that we've placed in the schools. I'm also very big on social and emotional security, making sure that bullying, is at a minimum in our school district. Every school district has bullying. There's bullying online, bullying everywhere. There's bullying with adults, in boardrooms everywhere, not necessarily ours, but in boardrooms everywhere. It happens. It's a terrible thing that humans choose to engage in behaving that way. But I'm really big on, in our school district, trying to make sure that our kids are emotionally safe and that they feel emotionally ready, as I said before, to learn. If you're not emotionally ready to learn, that's going to be a big hindrance. So for me, top 3 priorities are curriculum and improving our educational outcomes, facilities, and safety, which includes emotional safety as well as physical safety.
Thank you. Next questions. Since 2016, the vision for GCSD has been to achieve world-class school status by 2021, which is right around the corner. Have you achieved this goal? If yes, what measures are you using to substantiate this? And if no, what are your plans to get there? What metrics do you use to demonstrate progress?
Okay, I'll go first again because round robin. Is that okay, Ashley?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, sure. So I do not believe we've achieved this goal. I think we made awesome steps though to try to get toward this goal, and we're trugging ahead. Of course, our IB and having a diploma program with our IB program is a huge step. For me, world-class status means that we're able to travel anywhere in the world and compete with the children on an education level, on a humanitarian level. And I just think there's a lot more that we can do from the humanitarian level in order to help our children to understand the needs of the world, the needs of global warming. Even with this COVID-19 health crisis happening, our children can learn a lot more about science, learn a lot more about how viruses work, how viruses spread. And I think that at least my children's science teachers are really getting into a lot of that, which is helpful. And I think we just need to continue to support our IB program, support our international learning. We have our Mandarin program, and speaking to really stretching the intelligence of our students, but also stretching the curiosity and the learning that our students can achieve. I even with my own children, I have sought out private education, parochial education. My oldest daughter, I did take her to a private school for her second grade because I was not completely happy with what the experience I was having, but I learned that there wasn't that much different in the way of in the way of what Greenburgh could actually achieve. And so that's how I actually started to get even more involved, because I said, I see there's so much potential for even more to happen. And so that's kind of why I got even deeper into the advocacy in the school district. And I still see that there's ways we can continue to achieve, we can continue to do even better. What measures do I use to substantiate this? Definitely our education outcomes. Of course, the standardized testing is a way that you can measure it. But also, I go to the schools. I'm a board member that does show up. I have kids in 3 different schools, so I show up at 3 different schools. I speak to parents. I watch the children interact. And I do think there's really amazing students that we have, as well as staff. I think the IB curriculum, as I said, is amazing. I think even the ALP curriculum, which is Advanced Learning Program, is also pretty amazing. And I believe that we are offering quite a bit for our students. Even the non-ALP and non-IB classes are also challenging. We have very committed teachers, but I do think there's room for even more. I know when I first started becoming involved, I spent a lot of time with even the current superintendent, Dr. Chase, who was the curriculum superintendent at the time. And she really went out of her way to connect with the community. She was out there, she was at PTA meetings, she was informing parents on the different programs and really helping to engage the community and the parents. And I think that that's really necessary to kind of push us a little bit further to world-class status. We have a lot of families in this community that have amazing resources. I think we need to tap into those. I actually had a conversation with David Warner, who's another trustee, who's the chair of the CEC committee, which is a community engagement committee. And I talked to him about the possibility of really tapping into the expertise of different people that live in our community, tapping into our engineers, tapping into our environmentalists, really letting our children make connections with our politicians in the community. And because we have some awesome children with amazing ideas and imaginations. And if we don't tap into that, those dreams and those experiences can kind of get quieted. So I think we need to do a little bit more to achieve world-class status, but we're not that far off. What are your plans to get there? So one of the things would be community engagement and involvement. What metrics are you using to demonstrate progress? Well, I think, again, I got to go back to the educational outcomes. I think when children are excited about learning, they will learn more and they will perform better. But you have to keep their excitement up. You have to feed them and you have to encourage them to explore more, and then they will learn better.
Thank you. Ashley, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So let's see. Ms. Mairs covered a lot of territory with that one. That was an excellent job. I agree with her in that we have not yet achieved world-class school district status. Based on what's going on, I don't see us reaching that by 2021. I agree that the measures that I use to substantiate that are also educational based, such as testing scores, et cetera, because frankly, when you are looking to, go to a new community, one of the first things that everyone does is look up test scores. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, people make decisions based off of test scores. I know that when I brought my children back into the district, there were a lot of parents that were asking me, "Hey, well, how is the school district now?" And they've heard whatever they've heard, and they had their preconceived notions already. And the few that were willing to entertain the idea, the first thing I remember, one of them specifically texted me and said, "Yeah, but have you seen the test scores?" And I'm like, "Yeah, well, it's more than just test scores, but it is part of the conversation, right?" So in my mind, world-class school district status includes increasing those test scores that we are all looking at. We absolutely have to do that. But there's another facet of this that I think sometimes gets lost in the conversation when we talk about world-class school district status. And that's the fact that some of our buildings, they're not necessarily world-class buildings at this point, right? They're buildings that, they were built a long time ago, and there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to keep them, in good maintenance, and they haven't been updated and followed that path. So with that said, when you walk, you can walk into the best district in the world that has the great programs that we have. But if the buildings, and we see it, right, if there's leaks in the roofs and tiles are falling and acoustic ceiling tiles are getting wet, that doesn't give you the impression of a world-class school district. So I think that one of the things that we absolutely have to continue focusing on is getting our buildings into some state of relative. I don't foresee us, getting a magical golden pot of money at the end of the rainbow and just waving a wand and everything is brand new. But at least if we can continue, like I said, incremental projects to improve those things, then at least from a facilities perspective will be good. In terms of the measures I mentioned already, a lot of it has to do with the test scores. I think the other thing that comes into play, and I don't think that will ever fully change because people tend to have in my opinion, people tend to be averse to change in many times. So with that said, I don't necessarily think that anytime soon opinions that may already be deeply rooted about what something is like or whatever you may call it, I don't think that's going to necessarily change. But when I start seeing parents, and I've seen this already, parents that come into the community that hear the same things that I heard, which was, oh, don't send your kids to Greenburgh Central School District. And when I see some of those parents, the new parents that I talk to, and they they ask me for my frank opinion, I give them my experience and what it's been like. I've been on both sides. I had my kids in private school, I've had them in public school, and I give them my opinion. It's interesting to see that they're actually willing to give it a chance. A lot of times when you start talking to them about the programs and you tell them about IB and the one-to-one Chromebooks and the Mandarin program and all these, they're learning chess in school. I mean, my kids came home the other day. I'm going to obviously say this a few months ago because they didn't come home the other day, but they came home and they taught me this move in chess that I had never idea called a castle move. Apparently it's something very basic. Goes to show you how much I know about chess. But they're sitting here teaching me stuff, and I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. So with that said, I think those are all things that we're already doing that are getting us to world-class school district status, but there's still some ways to go. If we can get those test scores up, which we've been working on, we can continue working on our buildings. I think those two things alone will take us a long way of the equation. And then the last thing we need to do there is really we need to continue increasing our parental involvement because that is one of the backbones of any world-class school district. I don't care if it's a school district that has more funding, less funding. When you get a school district that has a lot of parental involvement, any little gaps that are there, we as the parents, we fill them. And that's, a lot of people, they'll look at school districts, neighboring school districts that are in wealthier communities, and they'll say, oh, look at, look at their test scores, look at this, look at that. What a lot of people fail to realize is those parents are really behind that school, and they're really putting in a lot of their personal time and resources into helping push that forward. And a lot of people miss that in the conversation. It's easy to miss it because obviously we're all busy and we're all running 1 million miles a minute these days. Thankfully, COVID-19, interestingly enough, has slowed down a little bit of that. I would venture to say that I'm actually more busier now at home than I am in the office a little bit. But with that said, it is giving me a little bit of an opportunity to balance things a little bit better on my side, at least personally. So with that said, I'm hoping that's the beginning of a shift in the way that we all approach thinking about, work-life balance and how much of that time we spend with our families. But with a little bit of luck, hopefully we can continue pushing towards world-class school district status. But I think we've gone a long way, but there's definitely still more to go.
I have a bit of a follow-up before we move on to the next slide, because I heard you both say the same metrics. I heard you both speak to test scores. I heard you both speak to parental community involvement. I heard you both speak to promoting and supporting and building the programs like IB and world languages, things that are a little outside the standard curriculum that really feed the growth of the entire child. But I heard Ms. Mairs come at it from a perspective of, because we're going to send the children into the world and we want them to be citizens of what's out there. And I heard Mr. Pineda say that when the world looks at us, we want them to see. So you're saying the same thing, but coming from from the opposite sides of the coin. And I'm wondering, as a board working cohesively, I know it's just the two of you right now, but you personally, do do you see those goals as mutually exclusive, or do you see the work complementing each other despite coming at these metrics from opposite ends?
Tracy, do you want me to take that first? It's up to you.
Sure, you can take it first.
So my personal opinion, and again, I'm speaking on the behalf of Mr. Pineda here, not the Board of Education. Just making sure that's clear for anyone that's listening. Personally, I think they're all complementary. I don't think you can raise the test scores without having sound buildings. I don't think you can have children that are emotionally and academically and overall well-rounded. I mean, I don't see a way to do that unless you've addressed every single piece of the pie, because let's forget about children for 1 second here, and let's just talk about us as adults. We've all heard Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all these psychological theories of how we as humans have to have all of these things met in order to maximize our full potential. Our children are adults in the making. They're humans just like us. And if that's true for us adults, then it's true for our children. They need to be completely, fully nurtured. We need to be able to expand upon the innate talents that each one of them has that's individual and makes them each special. And I don't think we can do any of that if we don't address all of the needs. I think they are totally intertwined. And I feel, my opinion is that deep down inside, if you get all 7 of those board members of us in a room and you talked it through, while we may many times have what may seem like complete polarized views on how we're tackling an issue, most of the time when you pull back the layers of the onion, on some level, we're saying the same thing. We may just not be necessarily agreeing that we're saying the same thing. And I'll leave it at that.
And I will definitely agree with that. I also think that it's important to have both the internal and the external views of how our students are performing. The students have to have good, strong educational self-esteem, how they see themselves, how they see their basis of their education and their learning is how they're going to go out, whether they go into college, whether they go into a trade, and whether they go on the other side of the world to work or to learn, is how they're going to bring with them their experiences in Greenburgh. They're going to bring with them what they learned, how they felt, who they became. We're raising children, and it's a partnership. Our children spend more waking hours with the school staff, with their teachers, with the staff there than they do with us. Pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, they get on the bus, they go to school, and they're there all day long. They're around their friends. They don't have mom looming over them or dad looming over them, seeing what they're saying and what they're doing. No one's there to tell my son to clean up behind himself. He has to pick it up and do it on his own, and he has to become a good citizen from within while he's there in the schools. And then when they graduate, they have to go out and be good citizens, hopefully, knock on wood. They have to go out and be good citizens in the world. And so I think looking inward and looking outward, there's a balance with that. And I think that's the way that we have to measure the success of the school district.
Thank you. We touched on some specifics here, but this was a pretty direct question from a couple of community members. You can both speak to this as directly or as generally as you feel is appropriate, numbers-wise, especially given that the new budget is just getting feet under itself. The question is, before the pandemic budget, Greenburgh's costs were significantly higher per pupil than other districts. In what ways can you, as a board member, align Greenburgh's per pupil costs with neighboring districts?
I'm losing track. Is it my turn to start?
I think so, Mr. Pineda, go ahead.
Oh, yes.
So the first thing, let me unmute myself. Okay. The first thing I want to say about this question, in the year and a few months that I've been on this board, this question is probably one of the most commonly asked questions. It comes up a lot. And it's interesting because when it first came up, I remember thinking to myself the first time I heard it, wow, why the costs are that different? And it was very much kind of an intriguing curiosity kind of point. As time has gone on, I've learned more about the specifics what's behind this question, I should say. With that said, I've learned, in my opinion, that we can't necessarily compare Greenburgh's per pupil cost with our neighboring school districts' per pupil costs, because there's a lot of different factors that go into those per pupil cost numbers. First off, many of our neighboring school districts do not have the same amount, needs as our children. We have a lot of children in our district that have specialized needs, and we do a really good job, in my opinion, of meeting those needs. So that alone will definitely change the costs per pupil. The other thing that gets lost is depending on who's doing the numbers and how they're crunching them, you'll get different results. So for example, I've seen this done before where, pre-K wasn't taken into account, ECP program wasn't factored in for, or it was only regular education versus special education, or it was, this factor or that factor. So it's one of those things where unless you really dig down into the numbers and you get onto the same page with the person asking the question, it's kind of hard to really, frankly, address it and have a fair comparison. What I will say is, as a board member myself, personally, and I know a lot of the board members also do the same thing, but I'm not going to speak for all of them. I'll speak just for myself. We are very, at least I am very cognizant of the tax impact and how much we actually do spend as a district. And our taxes here in Westchester County, Westchester County is one of the most highly taxed places you can go to in New York State. With that said, our taxes are high. I'm a homeowner. I know what everyone goes through. I always get sticker shock when that tax bill comes in. I know what it's supposed to come at more or less, but I still get shocked each time. And with that said, I try to do the best to make the best decision I can that is as fiscally responsible as possible while still trying to ensure I'm meeting the needs of our children and our community in general. I think you can see that through the extensive process the entire board went through. In this last budget cycle, we went through 7, 8, maybe almost 9 budget revisions, I think. Because I think at one point we had an A and a B in there somewhere. So with that said, it's one of those things where I don't think it's fair to say, Greenburgh's per pupil costs are significantly higher unless you sit there and you pull apart all those pieces that come into that equation. So that's how I answer that. That's my opinion.
And yes, I would agree with that. If you just look at the budget and then you look at the number of students and you try to divide, right, that is not taking into account, as Mr. Pineda said, a lot of the additional costs that we have. One of our largest costs actually is transportation. And this is true for all school districts, but what is not true is the wide disparity of children that we have that don't utilize our schools. So the fact that for whatever reason, we do not bring our students back to attend our school district, that actually creates additional costs because we do have some funding that is required to pay out to private schools. We have to fund their books, some of their books. We have to fund some of their nurses. We definitely have to fund the transportation. So if you go to a private school that is 15 miles away, we have to factor in that busing. When if you lived in Greenburgh, well, you live in Greenburgh, but if you attended Greenburgh Public Schools, you would just be busing locally and right on the local bus with the other students. So that's an expense. I know Mr. Pineda also talked about special education. Another expense is our facilities. And while my board that we have now, I think works very collaboratively as much as we can, we're also very tough on our administrators. We are very specific about getting answers and getting accountability for the money that is spent. But Yeah, it's definitely a concern, but it's not a apples to apples type of measurement.
Okay, thank you both. The district's infrastructure needs are a concern across the community. We've spoken extensively about that. Do you foresee a future bond? If so, how would you like to see the board partner with the community in the hopes of passing an infrastructure bond?
I'll go first on that. It's a tough question in our current COVID environment. Yes, I think that I don't think bonds are a bad thing. I think that bonds are a good thing. Actually, financially, fiscally, I learned that having bonds and having debt in a school district is actually a good thing. It actually helps us. And technically, we're in good financial standing in that we don't have a lot of active debt. We actually, in the last year of paying off a previous debt, where a lot of school districts have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, we actually don't. So we don't have loans that we're paying. So I do think we need to have a bond. If you look at other school districts, many of them bond maybe small bonds every few years, 2 to 3 years, they're doing a small bond, they're doing a small project, and then that district keeps that level of loan that they have to pay back. That helps them look good to the state to give money to, but then also it helps to maintain our buildings and upkeep all of the things that we need to do. So I definitely foresee a bond in the future, but definitely a much lower bond than we attempted last year. How would I like to see the board partner with the community in hopes of passing an infrastructure law? Well, I have a lot of ideas about community involvement. I'm on the community engagement committee, and I definitely think that we need to do a much better job. Hey, babe, we need to do a much better job of grabbing and including, this is Christopher, grabbing and including our community members and civic associations in, okay, go with Sister. Including our community and our civic associations in a lot of the planning, a lot of the planning for our bonds and as well for our school district. I think we need to remind our community of the great students that we have that attend the schools, as well as the staff, and the great work that's being done. And if we include them, bring them in the room, I think that things will get a little bit better. I actually think the benefit of having our bond go down last year is that we gained a whole bunch of attention and we gained a whole bunch of interest in the school district. People that were never coming out, maybe they were just home voting yes or no, they're coming out, they're asking questions. As Mr. Pineda said, they're coming to our facilities committee meeting. They're kind of inserting their expertise into our conversations in the school district, and that's what we need. We need more of that. So I definitely think we need to get out there and speak to people. And so hopefully next year our CEC committee will do a little bit more community engagement rather than having the community come to our meetings. Maybe we'll go to meetings. Maybe we will present information in a way that people are actually interested in what we're doing. In fact, the economic stress that our community is going to be under post-COVID may help, because people may choose to try the school district that wouldn't have otherwise chosen to try it because they can't afford private school or parochial school and they just want to save a little bit of money. They may try the school district and they may be happy. So, you know, it may work in our favor to have the community involved a little bit more.
Ms. Mairs, you said something, you said the same thing on two different sides. I'd like you to just briefly explain what you've learned.
Okay.
Or this can also be a totally fine time to turn it over to Mr. Pineda if you want to jump in and explain. Just to clarify for the people watching, you did point out that it's positive that we don't have debt. We're in very good financial standing. But you also pointed out that having that debt is a positive. Do you mean in the same way that you have to have debt to raise your credit score because it shows you're paying it off? Is it that? It's
similar to that. So if we, and I'm not sure how I said it exactly, so I want to clarify. Not having debt works against us when it comes to getting funding. So they look at our need for funding, and we don't seem to have a need for funding, even though we do. It looks like we don't have a need for funding. So that's what I mean. So
is that because we're able to pay all our bills? It doesn't look like we need help paying our bills. Is that? what the paper tells us?
Yes, and also that we don't, yes, so we're not having to pay out to